The silence before the dawn is a different kind of quiet. It is not merely an absence of sound, but a presence, a tangible, waiting fullness. It was in this specific, profound quiet that Leo found himself staring, not at the ceiling, but through it. His alarm was set for another 37 minutes, but his eyes had opened of their own accord, as if summoned. There was no frantic jolt, no groggy fog of disorientation. There was just this, a crystalline awareness in the dark, and a single, looping thought that felt less like his own and more like a truth, being whispered directly into his soul. This is not how your story is meant to begin. For Leo, the typical morning was a casualty of the previous night. It was a slammed snooze button, a groan muffled by a pillow, a frantic mental inventory of everything he'd neglected the day before. It was a scramble in the low light, a battle with wrinkled clothes, a burning toast sacrificed to the gods of hurry. His first conscious emotion was most often a low-grade anxiety, a neural static born from the dread of emails unopened, commitments looming, and the relentless sense of being perpetually behind. He would plunge into the digital stream the moment his fingers found his phone. And from that second, the day was no longer his. It belonged to the news cycle, to the social media feed, to the demands pinging into existence from the pocket-sized portal in his hand. He was reactive, a cork bobbing on a churning ocean, believing he was navigating when he was merely afloat. But this morning was different. The quiet didn't accuse him, it held him. The darkness wasn't a void, but a canvas. And that thought, this is not how your story is meant to begin, carried with it not a critique, but a promise. It spoke of authorship. It hinted that the first moments of the day could be something other than a defensive maneuver against chaos. They could be an intentional, gentle act of creation. He didn't reach for his phone. Instead, he lay still, listening to his own breath. In and out, he noticed the faint, cool draft from the window. He saw the earliest, deepest blue of pre-dawn beginning to dilute the pure black of the sky. A memory surfaced, unbidden. His grandfather, years ago, sitting on a porch swing as the sun came up, a simple cup of tea steaming in his hands. He wasn't doing anything, he was just being there, witnessing the day's arrival. Leo had thought it quaint, a relic of a slower time. Now, the memory felt like a clue. He pushed back the covers, the cool air raising goosebumps on his skin, feeling shockingly, refreshingly alive. He walked to the window and looked out. His city was still asleep. A constellation of streetlights and the occasional lonely car painting silent streaks of light. The world was hushed, and for this sliver of time, it was his. Not his to manage, or fix, or respond to. His to witness, his to greet. This, though he didn't yet have the words for it, was the first conscious step. It was the momentary, revolutionary act of not doing, of resisting the primal, modern urge to consume information, and choosing instead to simply inhabit a moment. In that space, the static in his mind began to settle. The mental list of tasks didn't vanish, but it receded. Losing its sharp, jagged edge, it became just a list, not a verdict. He made his way to the kitchen, not with a hurried stride, but with a slow, deliberate pace. He filled the kettle, listening to the water rush into the metal. He placed it on the stove. The click of the igniter, a sharp punctuation in the quiet. As he waited for the boil, he did something he hadn't done in years. He just stood, and he thought, not about work, or bills, or obligations. He thought about that feeling, the fullness of the pre-dawn quiet. He thought about his grandfather's peaceful face. He wondered, with a curiosity that felt almost foreign, what it would be like to carry that sense of peace beyond this single, stolen hour. The whistle of the kettle was a gentle crescendo, not an alarm. He poured the water over the tea leaves in his pot, watching them swirl and unfurl, releasing their color and essence into the liquid. He carried the pot and a single cup to his small living room, not turning on the overhead light, but letting the gradually building dawn provide the illumination. He sat, he poured, he inhaled the earthy, fragrant steam, and for 10 minutes, he did nothing but sip his tea and watch the world outside his window transform from monochrome to color. This was not productivity. This was not self. This was, he sensed, something more fundamental. It was alignment. It was as if his internal rhythm, frantic and scattered for so long, had stumbled just for these few minutes into sync with a slower, deeper, more ancient rhythm. The rhythm of the turning earth, of light chasing away darkness, of a natural, unhurried transition. When he finally finished his tea, the sun was a blazing orange line on the horizon. The day's demands began to knock softly at the door of his awareness. But something had changed. The door was no longer wide open, swinging on broken hinges, allowing the chaos to flood in. He had found the handle. He had closed it for a time. And in doing so, he had discovered a profound truth. You have to be able to close the door, even for a little while, to ever truly choose how and when to open it, and when to open it. His morning ritual that followed was simple, almost austere. He made his bed, smoothing the sheets with a care he usually reserved for nothing. The act felt less like a chore and more like a ceremony, an initial act of order, of claiming a small territory from the realm of chaos. He spent 5 minutes stretching, not as a workout, but as a conversation with his body, feeling the stiffness of sleep yield to the possibility of movement. He opened a small, leather-bound notebook, a gift long unused, and wrote just 3 lines. The quiet before dawn, the taste of bitter tea. A door I remembered how to close. He did not write a to-do list. He wrote an acknowledgement, a tiny anchor point in the flow of time that, then, and only then, did he pick up his phone. He turned it on with a sense of deliberate ceremony, not desperation. The screen lit up, and with it came the silent, digital onslaught. Notifications, badges, numbers, but the curious thing was, they seemed different. They seemed smaller, less like urgent commands, and more like messages left at the gate. He had met the day on his own terms first. He had filled his own cup, literally and metaphorically, before seeing what others wanted to pour into it. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer an empty vessel waiting to be filled by the world's noise. He was a grounded entity deciding what to let in. The entire experience lasted less than an hour, but it felt epic. As he prepared to leave his apartment, to step out into the rushing current of the city, he paused at the door. He felt a strange, new sensation. It wasn't excitement, nor was it calm. It was readiness. A quiet, solid readiness. He had touched something real in that pre-dawn stillness. A piece of himself that was not defined by his job, his responsibilities, or his inbox. It was a foundation, however newly discovered and fragile. His day proceeded with the usual meetings, tasks, and interactions. The chaos did not disappear. A project hit an unexpected snag. His commute home was delayed. Yet, his internal weather had changed. The frustrations arose, but they did not occupy him in the same way. It was as if the memory of that morning quiet existed as a still point within him, a reference. When stress began to build, he found himself unconsciously taking one deep, slow breath, a faint echo of his pre-dawn stillness. It was enough to create a sliver of space, a moment of choice between the stimulus and his reaction. That night, as he lay in bed, the whirlwind of thoughts began to gather. The snag in the project, the errand he forgot to run, the awkward thing he said in a meeting, they all clamored for attention. But, instead of following them down their rabbit holes, he remembered the feeling of watching the dawn. He remembered the handle on the door. He consciously relaxed his shoulders into the mattress and focused on the feeling of his breath moving in and out. It wasn't a magic cure for insomnia, but it was a different path than his usual mental treadmill. He was, however, clumsily beginning to architect his evening to support the possibility of another conscious morning, as sleep finally began to pull him under. The last coherent thought that formed was not a worry. It was a question born from the palpable difference a single, intentional hour had made. It was a question that shimmered with possibility and pointed toward the next day's dawn. If that hour was the foundation, what could possibly be built upon it? The question hung in the space between sleep and waking. What could be built upon it? It was there when Leo's eyes opened again, not to an alarm, but to that same familiar pride on quiet. This time, however, it was not a surprise visitor. It was an invitation. He had consciously gone to bed earlier, turning off screens an hour before, reading a few pages of a noveler real paper book that felt weighty and significant in his hands. The ritual felt awkward, almost contrived, but the result was undeniable. He had slept more deeply, and now he was awake, clear, before the world demanded to be heard. He repeated the simple ceremony from the previous day, the slow rise, the window gazing, the deliberate tea-making, but today, the quiet was not just for feeling, it was for thinking. That lingering question needed an answer. He felt the potential of that morning hour, its solidity, but it was like discovering a single, perfectly cut stone. Beautiful, foundational, but not yet a wall, let alone a shelter. How did one find more stones? How did they fit together? Was there a blueprint? As he sat with his tea, he recalled the strange sense of alignment. He'd felt the syncopation with a slower rhythm. It reminded him of something beyond his grandfather's porch. It nudged a memory from a long-ago philosophy class, a footnote in his mind, the Stoics, Roman emperors and slaves who spoke of inner fortitude. He remembered a name, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled the known world, yet spent his private hours writing reminders to himself in a personal journal. What was it he'd said? Something about the quality of your thoughts, determining the quality of your life, driven by a curiosity that felt both intellectual and deeply personal. Leo did something he hadn't done in a decade. After his morning quiet time, he went online, not for news, but for wisdom. He searched not for productivity hacks, but for Stoic morning routine. And the world opened up. He found not just dry philosophy, but a living, breathing manual for human resilience. He read about Memento Mori, remembrance of mortality not as a morbid threat, but as the ultimate clarifier, a lens that burned away trivial worries. He discovered the concept of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, which was not about fear, but about vaccination of the spirit through imaginative rehearsal. He learned about the Stoic focus on the dichotomy of control, the relentless, liberating practice of sorting the world into what is within your power, your judgments, your actions, your desires, and what is not, everything else. It was the philosophical articulation of finding the handle on the door. But what truly resonated, what made his skin prickle with recognition, was the concept of proheresis, the faculty of moral choice, the inner citadel of the self. The Stoics argued that while the world could besiege this citadel with pain, loss, insult, and chaos, it could never take it unless you opened the gates from within. His moment of not reaching for the phone was, he realized, a tiny, powerful exercise of his He had held the gate. The information was exhilarating, but also overwhelming. It was a vast, intellectual landscape. He needed a guide, a first principle. And then he found it, not in ancient Rome, but in a contemporary interpretation, linking to a Japanese concept, Ikigai, your reason for being, the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. The article connected it to Stoic thought, to the idea of living in accordance with your nature and fulfilling your role in the human community. This was the missing piece. His quiet morning had been peaceful, but it was potentially just a pleasant retreat. Ikigai was the compass that could give that quiet a direction. It could transform a sanctuary into a launch pad. The thought was both thrilling and daunting. His reason for being: he paid bills, he did his job adequately, he saw friends, he had passions once for drawing, for hiking, for writing short stories, but they had receded into the background noise of adult life. What did he love? What was he truly good at? The questions themselves felt like a kind of archaeology. Brushing dust off parts of himself long buried, he opened his neglected notebook again. This time, he didn't write an observation. He wrote for headings, creating a quadrant on the page. What I love, what I am good at, what the world needs, what I can be paid for. Under the first, he wrote tentatively: quiet mornings, good stories, the feeling of solving a complex problem, the smell of rain. It was a start. Under the second, he struggled. Was he good at his job in marketing, or just proficient? He wrote, seeing connections between ideas, explaining complex things simply, listening. The third column felt overwhelming. What did the world need? It needed less anger, more clean water, more compassion, better systems. He brought it down to scale. My corner of the world needs reliable people. It needs moments of unexpected kindness. It needs clear thinking amidst noise. The last column was easiest, yet most depressing. My current job, staring at the 4 disjointed lists. He saw no sweet spot of intersection, no blazing, obvious purpose. A wave of frustration rose. Was this just another self-help dead end? Then, a Stoic quote he'd just read floated back: the obstacle is the way. The frustration wasn't a sign to stop. It was the path itself. The lack of a clear answer was the inquiry. The act of asking the questions was, itself, the beginning of aligning with a purpose. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up knowing his purpose as emperor. He recommitted to it daily, through discipline and reflection. Ikigai wasn't a destination you found on a map. It was a direction you cultivated by walking. This shifted everything. The purpose of the morning quiet wasn't to magically unveil his life's grand blueprint. It was to create the clear, calm, mental space where he could engage with the question. It was to strengthen the faculty, the proheresis, that would allow him to make choices, however small, that nudged him closer to those intersecting circles. Maybe today, choosing to work with more focus was aligning what I am good at with what I can be paid for. Maybe later, choosing to call a friend who was struggling was aligning what I love, connection, with what the world needs, kindness. He closed the notebook, not with disappointment, but with a new mission. His morning hour now had a dual purpose. It was for grounding, for stillness, for claiming his inner citadel. And it was for gentle, non-judgmental inquiry. He would not force an answer, but he would show up each day and ask the questions, and trust that the act of showing up was building something. The rest of the day became a field for observation. He noticed when he felt a spark of engagement during a collaborative brainstorming session at work, connection, solving problems. He noticed the drag of resentment while filling out a tedious report, misalignment. He wasn't judging himself, just collecting data. He was, as the Stoics advised, practicing the art of distinguishing what was within his control. He could control his effort on the report, his attitude toward it. He could not control its existence. That night, his pre-sleep ritual felt less awkward. The book was a gateway out of his own circling thoughts. As he lay in bed, he practiced a form of premeditatio malorum. He imagined the project snag from the previous day turning into a full-blown crisis tomorrow. He felt the clutch of anxiety in his chest. Then, he asked himself, what is within my control? He could control his preparation, his communication with the team, his request for help. He could not control the client's reaction or the market's whims. By mentally walking through the fear, he defanged it. It became a set of circumstances to navigate, not a monster lurking in the dark. He slept deeply again. And when he woke the next morning, a Saturday, the quiet held a new quality. It was no longer just peaceful, it was potent. He had a framework. He had a philosophy that didn't promise eternal happiness, but offered unshakable resilience. He had a question to live into. He made his tea and returned to the window. The city was quiet in a different way on a weekend. He saw a man walking a dog, a delivery cyclist weaving through the streets, lights flicking on in apartment windows. He felt a connection to them, all not a personal connection, but a shared human connection. They were all, in their own ways, navigating their own circles of love, skill, need, and sustenance. They were all, in a sense, seeking their Ikigai. He opened his notebook once more. He didn't write in the quadrants. Instead, he wrote a line from Marcus Aurelius that had struck him. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. He had thought his journey was about building a better morning. He was beginning to understand it was about building a more awake life. The morning was the foundation, the philosophy was the blueprint, and Ikigai was the North Star. But a blueprint and a foundation are not a house. To build something habitable, something that could withstand storms, he needed materials. He needed the bricks and mortar of daily practice. He needed discipline, and as he finished his tea, watching the solid gold of the sun crest the buildings, he understood the next, necessary, and most challenging step. The serenity of the dawn was the reward, but it was purchased with a currency paid in the dark. It was time to forge that currency. The understanding that came with the dawn was both simple and severe. Serenity was not a gift the world gave you. It was a skill you forged, a muscle built through repetition, often against the grain of every instinct. The quiet hour was the reward, but the price was paid in a currency of consistent, unglamorous choices. Leo was standing at the edge of the foundation he'd discovered, blueprints in hand, and now he had to lift the first real stone. It was time to build discipline. The concept felt cold to him. Discipline conjured images of grim-faced soldiers, punishing routines, and the denial of joy. But the Stoic view, as he delved deeper, was different. They spoke of ascesis training, practice. It wasn't about punishment, it was about craftsmanship. A sculptor disciplines the marble to reveal the form within. A musician disciplines their fingers to set the music free. Leo's life was the material. His mind, his reactions, his hours were the tools. Discipline was the focused application of the tool to the material to create something of value. His first explicit test came with the alarm clock. He had been waking naturally, lured by the novelty and the profound peace. But what about a Tuesday, after a poor night's sleep? What about a cloudy, grim morning when the quiet felt heavy, not peaceful? He knew he had to standardize the ritual, to make it non-negotiable. He set his alarm for 5:30 a.m., a full hour and a half before he needed to leave for work. The first few days were fueled by initial enthusiasm. By the fourth day, the enthusiasm had burned off. The alarm was a violent shriek in the darkness. His body felt like lead. The voice in his head was persuasive and loud. "You've earned an extra hour. You can do this tomorrow. Just hit snooze. The quiet will still be there another day." This was the moment. This was the anvil. Lying there, suspended between the warm abyss of sleep and the cold demand of his commitment, he realized discipline was not an action. It was a reaction. It was what you did when every fiber of your being said no. He remembered the Stoic focus on acting according to principle, not according to feeling. The principle was, I am the type of person who honors his commitments, starting with the one to himself. The feeling was, I am exhausted and this is pointless. With a groan that was half despair, half defiance, he swung his legs out from under the covers and placed his feet on the cold floor. The victory was not poetic. It was physical and grim. But as he stood and walked to the window, a shift occurred. The act of overcoming the resistance generated a tiny, internal heat, a sense of integrity. He had told himself he would do something, and he had done it, despite the pleading of his lesser self. The resulting quiet of that morning was infused with a new quality, earned respect. It tasted different. It was no longer a stumbled-upon oasis. It was a well he had dug with his own will. He began to introduce structure into the sacred hour. The first 15 minutes were for absolute silence and observation, no writing, no reading, just breathing and witnessing. The next 20 were for study. He read a page or two of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or Epictetus's Discourses. He didn't devour chapters. He chewed on sentences. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He would read that, then close his eyes and look for the day's upcoming outside events, and consciously reiterate, these are not in my power. My judgment of them, my preparation for them, my conduct through them, that is my power. The final 25 minutes were for the Ikigai inquiry and planning. He'd write in his journal, not just observations now, but intentions. Based on his evolving understanding of his 4 circles, he would set one small intention for alignment that day. Not find my life's purpose, but something like, in the 3 p.m. meeting, focus entirely on listening and connecting ideas, which I am good at and enjoy. He was placing his stones one by one. With deliberate intent, the discipline extended backwards into the night. He learned why the Stoics emphasized preparation. A chaotic evening guaranteed a fractured morning. He instituted a digital sunset no screens after 9 p.m. The first night was a revelation in anxiety. His hands literally itched for his phone. His mind, accustomed to the constant scroll, rattled around like a pinball in the empty space. To calm it, he took Seneca's advice to review his day. He'd ask himself 3 questions in his journal. What did I do well today? Where did I act out of alignment? What could I learn from this? This practice, which he called his evening audit, did 2 things. It closed the psychological loop on the day, providing a sense of completion, and it provided raw material for his morning study. He was seeing his own patterns, his triggers, his small victories. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at work, where he'd snapped at a colleague, his audit was painful. He wrote, I did not control my impression. I saw the missed deadline as a personal affront, not a logistical problem. I reacted with irritation, not inquiry. I damaged a bridge. The next morning, his Stoic reading was on anger. He read Seneca's letters on the subject. How anger is a temporary madness, a useless fire that burns the vessel that contains it. The connection between his lived experience and the ancient text was electric. This was no longer philosophy. It was repair manual. His journal intention that day was, see obstacles as logistics, not personal attacks. pause before speaking. He was building a feedback loop of conscious living, evening reflection, morning study, daily intention, evening reflection. The discipline was creating a structure that made growth possible, even inevitable. The physical space of his apartment began to reflect this inner order. He made his bed with military precision every morning, a tiny, daily act of triumph over chaos. He cleared his desk each night, so the morning's first view wasn't clutter. He placed a small, smooth stone he'd found on a hike by his window, a tactile memento mori. You, too, are of this earth, and to it you will return. What will you do with this day? These were not just chores. They were rituals, physical prayers, reinforcing his mental commitments. But the forge's fire is tested by real heat. 3 weeks into his new practice, a professional crisis hit. A major client threatened to pull out. His boss was panicking. The team was spiraling. The old Leo would have been consumed working frantic 16-hour days, refreshing his email every 30 seconds, his stomach in knots, his sleep destroyed. The new Leo felt the same initial lurch of panic. The adrenaline surge was biological, inevitable. But then, his training engaged. During his morning quiet, he practiced premeditation. He imagined the worst-case scenario, losing the client, the blame, the financial hit, perhaps even losing his job. He felt the fear fully. Then he asked the Stoic question: what of this is within my control? He could control his analysis of the problem. He could control his effort in crafting a solution. He could control his communication, his professionalism, his willingness to work with a team. He could not control the client's ultimate decision. The fear, when held in this light, transformed from a monster into a set of difficult but manageable tasks. He went into the office, not with false calm, but with a focused clarity. He called the team together and said, "Our job is not to guarantee the outcome. Our job is to exhaust every option within our control to produce the best possible outcome. Let's identify what those are." He worked hard, but he did not work frantically. He left the office at a reasonable hour, having done his controlled part. He observed the panic in others, and instead of being infected by it, he saw it as a reminder of the very chaos he was learning to navigate. The client was retained. The crisis passed. In the aftermath, his boss pulled him aside. "I don't know how you stayed so steady during that," he said. "It kept the whole team from going over a cliff." Leo just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. The real victory wasn't the retained client, it was the proof that the forge worked. The discipline had held. The inner citadel had remained secure while the siege raged outside the walls. That night, during his evening audit, he wrote, "Today, the philosophy ceased to be a practice and became a part of me. It was not something I did. It was the lens through which I saw. The forge is no longer a place I visit. I am becoming the forge itself." He went to bed that night with a profound sense of integration. The disciplines of the morning and evening, the study, the reflection, they were weaving together into a new way of being. But, as he lay there, a new and unsettling question arose from the depths of his calm. It was a question about the nature of the citadel he was building. It was strong. Yes, it was resilient. But a citadel is, by definition, a defensive structure. It is designed to keep things out. Was the goal merely to become an impenetrable, self-sufficient fortress, isolated and secure? Or was the point of inner strength something else entirely? Was the fortification not an end, but a means to a more daring, more connected kind of life? The walls were up. Now, he wondered about the purpose of the gates. The question about the gates of his citadel lingered for days, a quiet hum beneath the surface of his disciplined routines. He had built a formidable inner stability. He could now meet most days with a steady gaze, untroubled by the minor chaos that once appended him. But this very steadiness began to feel, at times, like a form of isolation. He was the calm at the center of the storm, but was he also separate from the raw, messy, beautiful humanity swirling around him? The Stoics spoke of duty and community, the cosmopolis, the world's city, but how did that translate from the solitude of the morning page to the complexity of a human relationship? Complexity of a human relationship. The answer arrived not from a book, but from a failure. His friend, Mark, was going through a brutal divorce. Over coffee, Mark spilled over with anger, grief, and confusion, a torrent of raw, unfiltered pain. The old Leo would have jumped in immediately with advice, trying to fix it, to solve the unsolvable. The newly disciplined Leo listened, but he listened so calmly, so stoically, that he realized he was holding himself at a remove. He was observing Mark's suffering as an external event. Applying the dichotomy of control, his emotions are not in my control. His choices are not in my control. While true, it created a barrier. In his effort to not be swept away by the emotion, he had erred on the side of detachment. He offered a rational perspective, a quote from Epictetus about enduring what cannot be changed. Mark looked at him, eyes red-rimmed, and said, "I know you're trying to help, but it just makes me feel alone." The words were a shock. They struck at the heart of Leo's silent question. He had mistaken equanimity for apathy. He had fortified the citadel so well he'd forgotten the purpose of a gate, not just to keep things out, but to allow safe passage for connection. True Stoic virtue wasn't impassivity, it was courage, and courage included the courage to be vulnerable. To sit with another's pain without fleeing into either frantic action or cold analysis. It was the courage to say, "This is terrible. I am here with you in it." He apologized to Mark the next day, not for the philosophy, but for his application of it. "I gave you the theory," he said, "when what you needed was my presence. I'm sorry." That simple act of vulnerable admission did more to bridge the gap than any perfect quote ever could. It was a lesson in applied philosophy. Wisdom without compassion is just cleverness. The inner fortress was not meant to be a prison for the self, but a secure base from which to venture out into the emotionally risky terrain of human connection. This insight reshaped his understanding of his morning practice. It wasn't just preparation for his day, it was preparation to show up better for others. His Ikigai inquiry took on a new dimension. What the world needs wasn't an abstract concept. It was the specific need of his grieving friend for companionship. It was the need of his overworked colleague for a moment of recognition. His purpose wasn't just a personal intersection. It was a point of contribution to the human web around him. He decided to test this in a structured way. He remembered the Stoic idea of shared learning and a modern concept of an accountability partner. He reached out to a colleague, Sarah, whom he respected for her diligence but who seemed perpetually stressed. He proposed a simple pact. They would check in every Monday and Thursday morning for 5 minutes. Not to complain, but to state one intention for the day related to their growth, and one thing they were grateful for. It was a tiny, mutual act of holding a space for intention. The first check-in was awkward. "My intention is to not get overwhelmed by my inbox," Sarah said tentatively. "My gratitude is that my commute was easy today." Leo shared his own. It felt insignificant. But by the third week, something shifted. Sarah began to share more. "My intention is to speak up in the board meeting, even though I'm nervous. My gratitude is for your consistency in doing these check-in sits, making me look at my mornings differently." The partnership became a two-way street of encouragement. He was not just building his own discipline, he was participating in the cultivation of someone else's. This was the cosmopolis in action, a micro-community of mutual striving. The gate of his citadel was open, allowing for both support and the receipt of it. He began to practice what he thought of as micro courage. It was the application of his hard-won inner stability to small, outwardly directed actions. It was choosing to have a difficult but necessary conversation with his landlord, calmly and clearly, rather than avoiding it. It was the courage to admit, "I don't know," in a meeting, instead of bluffing. It was the courage to perform a small, unobserved act of kindness, paying for the coffee of the person behind him in line, leaving a genuine note of thanks for the cleaning staff at his office. These acts were not in any philosophy book, but they felt like the living expression of the virtues he was studying: justice, fairness, courage, action, and temperance, moderation in self-concern. The practice of Memento Mori also transformed in this light. Remembering the finitude of life was no longer just a tool for personal focus, burning away his trivial worries. It became a profound driver of compassion. That person who cut me off in traffic, the rude customer service agent, the stubborn colleague, they too are living a life that will end. This thought didn't excuse poor behavior, but it drained Leo's impulse toward irritation and replaced it with a broader, weary curiosity. It encouraged him to be kinder, to waste less time on resentment, to mend fractures quickly. His finite time was too precious to spend inhabiting the cramped space of grievance. One rainy evening, his negative visualization exercise took a poignant turn. He imagined losing the ability to walk. He felt, as vividly as he could, the frustration, the limitation, the grief. When he opened his eyes, he looked at his own legs with a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought tears. But it didn't stop there. The exercise extended outward. He imagined Mark never recovering from his grief. He imagined Sarah being laid off. By mentally walking through these valleys with people he cared about, he found his compassion deepening. He wasn't preparing for disaster. He was rehearsing empathy. The next time he saw Mark, his presence was fuller, quieter, more patient. He didn't need to fix anything. He just needed to be a witness who understood the depth of the canyon, because he had dared to look into it himself. Leo realized his entire journey had been moving in concentric circles. It started at the innermost circle, the self, his own thoughts and mournings. It expanded to a circle of practice, discipline, philosophy, routine. Now, it was expanding into the widest circle: relationship and contribution. The inner work was not the end goal. It was the necessary foundation for effective outer work. An unstable vessel spills what it carries. A fortified, stable vessel can carry water to others. He saw now that the Stoic ideal wasn't the isolated sage on a mountaintop. It was the person in the forum, in the family, in the thick of life, engaged, responsible, contributing, but doing so from an unshakable core that the chaos could not corrupt. The point of building the citadel was not to hide within it, but to ensure you had a sanctuary of clarity from which to govern your actions in the world. The gates were for bringing the fruits of your inner cultivation, your patience, your justice, your courage out into the marketplace. As he prepared for bed one night, his evening audit reflected this expansion. He wrote, "Today, I used my calm not just as a shield, but as a space. I held a space for Sarah's anxiety without absorbing it. I held a space for my own frustration in traffic without letting it dictate my mood. The citadel is not a hiding place. It is a watchtower. From here, I can see farther and respond more clearly, not just for myself, but for my small part of the city." He fell asleep with a sense of integration deeper than any he had felt before. The threads were coming together: the self, the practice, the community. But one thread remained, shimmering and essential: He had learned to build his days with discipline and connect with others with courage. Yet, life was not a straight line of progress. It was a cycle of dawn and dusk, effort and rest, building and letting go. To be truly unshakable, he needed to understand not just how to hold on, but how to release. He needed to master the final, graceful art of closure. The sun must set, so that dawn can be born again. The realization that completion was as vital as commencement settled upon Leo like the gentle, inevitable dusk that followed his carefully met dawns. He had mastered the art of beginning the quiet claim on the day's first hour. He had endured the forge of discipline, building an inner structure that could bear weight. He had learned to open the gates of that structure, to connect, to contribute, to courageously engage. But life was not a perpetual, linear ascent. It was a circle, a breathing in and out. To cling only to the building, the doing, the holding on, was to resist the other half of existence. It was to fear the night. True resilience, he sensed, was not just the strength to hold the line, but the wisdom to know when to release it. This lesson announced itself not with a crisis, but with a subtle, accumulating tension. He found himself becoming possessive of his morning ritual. If a late work call encroached on his evening wind down, he felt a disproportionate ripple of annoyance. If his Saturday morning was interrupted by an unexpected request from a neighbor, he noticed a stiffness in his compliance. His routines, designed to create freedom, were beginning to forge their own invisible chains. He was holding the vessel of his practice so tightly, he was leaving finger marks on the clay. The Stoics called this the paradox of desire. Even the pursuit of virtue could become a vice if it was rooted in attachment and fear of disruption. The missing piece was the conscious, grateful release. It was the practice of closure. He discovered it in the ancient Stoic exercise of the evening meditation. But he came to understand it as something more than a review. It was a ritual of relinquishment. He began to formalize the final minutes before sleep. He would sit in his chair, the same one from which he watched the dawn, and look out at the darkened city. He would take his notebook and, instead of auditing his day with a problem-solver's eye, he would perform an act of thanksgiving. He called it the tally of gifts. He would write down 3 specific things from the day that had been granted to him. Things he had not earned and could not control. The steam rising from his afternoon cup, the unexpected laughter shared with Sarah over a silly typo in a report, the way the streetlight haloed the rain on his evening walk. The practice was actively, deliberately shifting his gaze from what he had built or controlled to what he had received. This simple act had a profound effect. It reframed the entire day from a series of accomplishments and failures into a tapestry of given moments. The project setback became the gift of a challenge that revealed his team's loyalty. The frustrating commute became the gift of 10 minutes of a favorite podcast. By looking for the gift, he was not denying difficulty. He was changing his relationship to it. He was practicing the core Stoic tenet of accepting what fate had dealt, not with grim resignation, but with an active, seeking gratitude. He was aligning his will with the universe's flow, rather than straining against it. The ultimate test of this release came in a form he could never have premeditated. His father, who lived in another state, had a sudden, severe stroke. The phone call in the dead of night was a fissure in the world. The next 72 hours were a blur of frantic travel. Hospital waiting rooms smelling of antiseptic and anxiety, and difficult conversations with doctors. All routines, all rituals, all sense of control evaporated. In the ICU, sitting by his father's still form, Leo felt the old foundations shake. The morning quiet, the journal, the structured hour, they were continents away. For the first time in months, He felt utterly, terrifyingly adrift. The citadel he had built seemed like a sandcastle before this tidal wave of fear and love and loss. He tried to grasp for his practices, but they slipped through his fingers. He couldn't meditate. He couldn't find a quiet corner for reflection. The dichotomy of control mocked him. His father's survival, the neural pathways in his brain, the skill of the surgeons, all utterly outside his control. All he had was this plastic chair and the beep of the heart monitor, and then, in the depth of that exhaustion, he remembered the release. He remembered that the goal was not to be an unfeeling rock, but to be a flexible, deep-rooted tree that could bend in the hurricane without breaking. He let go. He let go of the need to have a stoic response. He let go of the expectation that he should be perfectly resilient. He simply allowed himself to feel the fear, the love, the helplessness. He cried, not as a breakdown, but as a release of unbearable pressure. In that surrender, a different kind of clarity emerged. He saw what was within his control with piercing acuity. He could control the gentleness of his touch on his father's hand. He could control the clarity and calm with which he spoke to his terrified mother. He could control being fully, painfully present in that room, instead of retreating into his own panic. He could control asking the nurses intelligent questions and ensuring his father's comfort. His sphere of control had shrunk to a few essential human actions, and that was enough. He also practiced gratitude in the trenches. In the terrible vigil, he would tally microscopic gifts. The nurse with the kind eyes, the cup of terrible, hot coffee that warmed his hands, the moment his father's eyelids fluttered. This was not positive thinking. It was a lifeline. It was the conscious choice to anchor his spinning mind to small points of light in the overwhelming dark. It prevented him from being swallowed by the abyss. His father survived, though the road to recovery would be long and uncertain. In the weeks that followed, shuttling between cities, managing care, and holding his family together, Leo's old routine was impossible. But something remarkable happened. He found he didn't need the elaborate scaffolding. The philosophy had been internalized. He would snatch 5 minutes of quiet on a hospital stairwell, just breathing. He would turn a solitary drive into an opportunity for negative visualization, preparing himself for the next difficult conversation. He used his accountability pact with Sarah not to discuss productivity, but to simply say, "Today, my intention is to be patient with my mother. My gratitude is for the physical therapist's encouragement." When life eventually, gradually, regained a semblance of normalcy, and he returned to his own apartment, his first morning back was not a rigid return to protocol. He woke late. He made tea and sat at his window. The city's dawn was the same, but he was not. He had been stripped down to his essence and found that the core practices, presence, the dichotomy of control, gratitude, connection were not dependent on a perfect setting. They were the essence itself. He opened his journal for the first time in weeks. He didn't write a plan or an audit. He wrote a single sentence. The vessel must be empty to be filled. His fierce discipline had filled him with strength. His crisis had emptied him through necessity. Now, he understood the cycle. The morning ritual was the filling, the intentional taking in of quiet, wisdom, and intention. The evening gratitude was the emptying, the grateful release of the day, the relinquishment of what could not be held. One required the other. You could not have a meaningful dawn without a complete dusk. He resumed his routines, but their texture had changed. They were no longer a rigid defense against chaos, but a flexible dance with life's rhythm. Some mornings were full and serene. Others were short and pragmatic. He held them lightly. The fortress was still there, but the gates now swung freely open, and he was no longer afraid to venture far from its walls. because he knew he carried its peace within him. He was no longer building a life to be perfect. He was living a life that was whole, which included both effort and surrender. One evening, 6 months after his father's stroke, as he performed his tally of gifts, he realized the final, seamless integration. His Ikigai was no longer a diagram to be solved. It was the lived experience of that very moment, using his skill of listening what he was good at, to help his father with his speech exercises what the world needed, which was an act of love, what he loved, and was part of his role as a son, a duty that carried its own profound payment. The circles had overlapped not in a job title, but in a moment of unremarkable, sacred care. He closed the journal. The story that had begun with a desperate, silent plea in the dark, "This is not how your story is meant to begin," had found its ending, which was, of course, a new beginning. He had learned to author his days, not by scripting every line, but by mastering the punctuation, the powerful comma of the morning intention, the strong period of the evening release, and the gentle, accepting ellipsis in between that left room for life itself to write its unexpected, beautiful, and uncontrollable prose. He turned off the light and lay in the dark, not fighting his thoughts, but letting them drift like leaves on a slow-moving river. He was ready for the night, ready for the release, ready for the gift of the unknown dawn that would surely follow. The journey was complete, and it would begin again tomorrow, and it would begin again tomorrow.